The latest on Jeremy Swayman, no Bruins in the top 20 for centers, and a mailbag question here on a new episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Friday, August 23rd, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my dad jokes, hockey thoughts at Ian C. McLaren. For those of you new to the podcast, I'm a lifelong Bruins fan. I have been covering this team for various outlets for around 20 years. Worked for 5 years as a hockey news editor at thescore.com and have been hosting this podcast since 2019. All right, let's get into the very latest on Jeremy Swayman. Now, we all know we're about a week away from September, and the Bruins franchise goalie is still without a contract. Team president, NHL Hall of Famer Cam Neely, though, isn't bothered by negotiations dragging on or the fact that they've come this close to training camp without a deal. In an appearance on the Rich Shirtenlieb show, Cam Neely said, quote, "Something will get done. There's no question. Not every negotiation is as smooth as you'd like. I know our fan base would certainly love to have something done by now, but I'm fully confident that both sides will come to an agreement before too long here." End quote. Swayman also recently expressed confidence that a deal will get done. So with both sides so confident, it's a bit surprising that we're still in this position. The Bruins do have $8.64 million in projected cap space and a pretty full roster. Although I think they would like a measure of flexibility heading into training camp to add some PTOs or perhaps revisit James Van Riemsdyk to be able to improve the roster elsewhere and not max out on this Swayman contract. So what's the holdup here? Well, perhaps there is some disagreement in terms of contract term, in terms of valuation. Do they want to go a shorter contract? Do they want to go the full 8 years? Do the Bruins want to see how he reacts as the full-time goalie, carrying 50, 55 starts? Is Swayman so confident in his game that he is looking for $10 million per season? Sean Hutchin of the Fourth Period tweeted yesterday that sources close to the situation tell him that while talks are ongoing, the Bruins and Swayman are far apart in contract term and dollar amount. Now, of course, let's take this with a bit of a grain of salt. This isn't coming from one of the big insiders, but Elliot Friedman on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast did say something similar, and that's a bit concerning. For me, a Swayman deal should have been done right after Ullmark was traded, or even preceding that trade. You do that type of business, then you can move on from Ullmark, who's got a very nice $5 million contract for one more season. But if you deal him, you better have a deal lined up for Swayman right away. And the fact that Ullmark is gone, they have Joonas Korpisalo and Brandon Bussi as a contingency plan. Swayman has the leverage here, right? He's saying, well, Ullmark's gone. You traded my partner, my best friend, and now you're left with really not much to work with if you don't give him the max deal or the max income that he is looking for. So Swayman, with his playoff performance, he really cemented himself as Boston's goalie of the future and the present, and one of the better goalies in the NHL at the moment. And he wants to be paid as such. He wants to be in the top 5 in terms of what his new contract will be. Could be in line for something around 7.5 or 8 million per season moving forward. And that's really right where you should value him, behind Sergei Bobrovsky, Andrei Vasilevsky, Connor Hellebuck's making that amount of money. He would be in the top 5 highest paid goalies in the NHL, and kind of rightfully so, because he's just that good. Now, paying him that amount of money would put him in that top 5 range. And again, it's well worth it because he's still very young. He arguably has his best years ahead of him. He would be kind of, if you pay him, say, $8 million, he'd be coming in after Bobrovsky, Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, and Ilya Sorokin, who is signed at 8 years, $8.25 million. And Swayman is 5 years younger than Sorokin. He's 7 years younger than Hellebuck, 6 years younger than Vasilevsky, 11 years younger than Bobrovsky. And so there's every reason to believe you will get full value out of that contract. For me, give him the 8 years, $8 million. I don't think there's much risk there in terms of that contract not aging well. So while I'm not super worried that something's going to get done, if indeed they are far apart on terms and value, hopefully it's just a matter of they haven't really talked much lately. But we're getting here towards the time where guys are going to start coming back into town, start skating. You don't want this to be a distraction as training camp begins. So come together. Hopefully they can meet and find a deal that works for both sides here sooner than later. Be sure to subscribe to the Locked On Bruins YouTube channel, because if and when something happens, I'll pop up a quick video and you'll get all the latest there on the YouTube. We talked a couple weeks ago about the goalie rankings, where Swayman came in 4th. We talked about the winger rankings, where Pastrnak came in 4th as well. Marchand a bit later on in the rankings. What about the center rankings? Any Bruins sniffing the top 20? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. If you need to hire, then there's no better place to check out than Indeed. We are all driven by the search for better. And when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. It's to match. And that you can do with Indeed. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, messaging. You can connect with candidates faster. And they don't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Listeners of Locked On Boston Bruins will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL. All the latest news, opinions, and insights from our national hosts and local contributors. And it is also free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Go check out Locked On NHL right after listening to this podcast. So the NHL has been releasing top 20 winger and goalie rankings. This week, they turn to the center position, saying winning important faceoffs, leading rushes up the ice, setting up teammates are the hallmarks of an elite center. NHL Network produces an analysis of the position, top 20 centers, and this is a 9-part series. I'm not sure where they will turn next, but here on the center list, there is not one Boston Bruin present. Obviously, Connor McDavid is at the top of the list, followed by Nathan MacKinnon, the reigning Hart Trophy winner, Austin Matthews, Leon Draisaitl, Alexander Barkov, rounding out the top 5. Barkov, of course, Selke winner, Stanley Cup winner. He is probably the best two-way center in the NHL. Then you have Sidney Crosby, who continues to be excellent even at 37 years old. Braden Point, Jack Eichel, Jack Hughes, and Elias Pettersson rounding out the top 10. Following that, you have JT Miller of the Vancouver Canucks, Sebastian Aho, Connor Bedard, Rupe Hintz, Dylan Larkin, Nick Suzuki, Tim Stützle, Robert Thomas, Mika Zibanejad, and Nico Hischier. That's the list. Not a Bruin to be found. And I guess that's kind of fair because, let's be honest, the Bruins have 3 guys down the middle who perhaps are really second or third line centers in Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, and now Elias Lindholm. If you look at the center position scoring last season, there isn't a Bruin on the list until 46 and 50. Charlie Coyle had 25 goals, 35 assists for 60 points. Pavel Zacha had 21 goals, 38 assists for 59 points. And Elias Lindholm, who was signed to a 7-year, $7.75 million contract, he too is well down the list after a down season for him offensively. Now, there's definitely a chance that Lindholm could rebound and be on the list at this point next summer. If you look at historical numbers from 2019-20 to 2023-24, Lindholm ranks 24th among all centers with 291 points. That's a 0.8 point per game average. 363 games played, 127 goals, 164 assists for 291 points. Behind Dylan Larkin, Evgeny Malkin, and ahead of Brock Nelson, Rupe Hintz, who's on this list, ahead of Nick Suzuki, Robert Thomas, Jack Hughes. So if you put Lindholm with Zacha and David Pastrnak, for example, and if he can replicate his success from the past few seasons, if he can become that elite two-way player that he has shown in the past, then it's quite reasonable to suggest that he will be on this list here next summer. But still kind of a big if. If you look at points per game since 2019-20, he's down at 35th, and that's among guys who have played at least 100 games. Total points, he ranks, let's see here. Yeah, 24th among those guys who have played at least 100 games. He's a great faceoff player. He ranks, let's see here, among centers in the faceoff dot, 41st with a 53.6% success rate. So what needs to happen here is he needs to play big minutes with Zacha, Pastrnak. He needs to get some power play time. He needs to win a lot of faceoffs. He needs to be proficient in his own end. And there's a chance that he could be back on this list next summer, but that's a pretty big if. I don't see Coyle or Zacha cracking that anytime soon. Matt Poitras. The Bruins are, I don't want to say deep at center, but they do have a lot of options at the center position. John Beecher, Trent Frederick, Matt Patra, Morgan Geekie. Best case scenario, Patra develops into the next David Krejci and is on this list for years to come. But there's not really that Bergeron-Krejci duo ready to step up in the pipeline. I mean, could it be Lindholm-Patra? Maybe, but Lindholm, yeah, there's every reason to believe that that contract might not age super well, seeing as he's already, he's not a spring chicken, let's say, and 7 years, $7.75 million, and he's already 29. He's going to turn 30 on December 2nd. So are his best years behind him, or will he be reinvigorated by playing for the Boston Bruins? And I think that's possible here in the first few years. It's definitely possible that he could be a top 20 center in the NHL this season. But the Bruins, again, have 2 or 3 second, third line centers still without that elite guy like McDavid, Matthews, anybody who's going to push for 80 points, much less 100 points here coming up. So that's the situation for the Bruins, which kind of leads into a question I got in terms of the mailbag, and we will address that here as the podcast continues. All right, I have to tell you about this new feature that Game Time has called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks, the selections are curated to make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater near you. All-in pricing means there's no surprise fees at checkout. I love the seat view, so you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and they have a low price guarantee. They'll credit you 110% of the difference. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Game Time, last minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. So I put out a call for mailbag questions and got one from JD Young, who's the host of Locked On Sharks. He asked, how long until the wheels fall off this thing and the Bruins have to tear it down? That's a really interesting question because there's, logic would say that the Bruins have had this incredible run of success and they are due to fall back at some point. But they do have a franchise goalie in Jeremy Swayman, who's yet to be signed, of course. They do have one defenseman in Charlie McAvoy, and they have an elite winger in David Pastrnak. So that's a pretty good core to build around. And if you have those 3 guys locked in at their positions long term, then you're set up for success and you can work around that. Now, they have had a lot of years where they have gone all in and traded away first round picks and have therefore kind of reduced their prospect pool to where it's routinely ranked 32nd in the NHL, and there's not really much there beyond Mason Lohrei, John Beecher, Justin Brazeau, if you consider him a Bruins prospect, Fabian Lysell, of course, who is expected to take a step. So if those guys don't pan out, and if Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, or Elias Lindholm, who we've all talked about, if they don't pan out down the middle, if they are unable to carry the load, then you kind of have this mixed bag where you're carried by these younger guys who are elite at their positions, but you don't really have much else. I think Lindholm, Zadorov will shore up this team. I think this year they're still a playoff team. For me, this is a playoff team until they're not. I'm not going to predict that they're going to pop out of the playoffs. I think you're seeing, obviously, the Florida Panthers are the class of the NHL, the Atlantic Division, but there's real question marks when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Tampa Bay Lightning. You have up-and-comers in the Canadiens, the Red Wings, the Senators, the Sabres, but until any of those teams prove that they're able to jump up into a playoff spot, it's going to be hard to believe. And if you look over at the Metropolitan Division, you have the New York Rangers, obviously, who won the President's Trophy last year. But there's not really a lot of teams that jump out as perennial contenders. I think you could see the New Jersey Devils take a big step forward this season. But the Hurricanes, I don't think, are as good as they were. The Capitals and Penguins are arguably further along in their deconstructions than the Bruins are. I think the Bruins have been able to rebuild on the fly a bit better than those teams. The Penguins haven't made the playoffs in a couple of years. The Capitals barely squeaked in and then were tuned in the playoffs, although you could argue that they're a bit improved. The Blue Jackets aren't going anywhere. The Flyers, perhaps on the rise. Islanders, I always doubt them anyway. So to think that there are 8 teams better in the East than the Boston Bruins, I don't think that's the case right now. Don Sweeney has done a good job of rebuilding or building on the fly. I don't want to say rebuilding because they didn't really have a deconstruction per se. But, if they're not going to dip that big in a year where they lose Bergeron and Krejci and they still have all these question marks, the one thing that could work against them, of course, if Swayman's not in camp, and he doesn't sign past December 1st and he's not a Bruin this season, then yeah, the wheels will fall off. But if Swayman's back, if he keeps playing as we know he can, lives up to whatever contract he signs, if you still get that production from McAvoy on the back end, both in his own zone and maybe another step offensively, if you continue to get elite play from David Pastrnak and a collection of good enough from the centers, this team should still be competitive for quite a while. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's just what I think. And that's it for this week's episodes of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do subscribe if you have not already. I hope you're all doing well, taking care of yourselves, taking care of each other. The last weekend of the summer, crazy to think, training camp right around the corner, and we'll get back to 5-day-a-week podcasts here pretty soon. So please do subscribe so you don't miss a thing here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.